Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another list for all of you. Today we're going to be looking at 10 comic books that are always on my mind. For whatever reason, I find myself going back to, whether I'm thinking about it, rereading issues, flipping through the collections, I'm always thinking about a lot of books, and these are just 10 of my favorites that I feel like are always kind of circling in my head. Frankly, I'm excited just to share a little bit more about each of these books, but before we dive into today's list video, I just wanted to shout out our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see something there you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to receive $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's list. First up today, we're going to be talking about a favorite of mine, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King and Bilquis. For me, this is easily one of my favorite books I've had the pleasure of reading since I started my channel. I voted this as my favorite comic book read of 2023, and with good reason. This is a really fun, one part maybe coming of age story, one part revenge narrative, one part, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a beautiful just musing on life and maturity and kind of growing as a person. We have kind of a buddy comedy drama aspect to it all mixed in. Essentially, this story finds Supergirl at an interesting crossroads in her own life, but she gets paired up with this young woman who's just lost her father at the hands of a really devious and evil man. The two of them team up and travel the stars trying to hunt down this killer. It's a really fascinating miniseries. You don't need to read anything prior to really just sit down and enjoy it. It's absolutely a one-and-done graphic novel, I would say, and I just adore it. The art from Bilquis, as you can see here, is just outstanding. I've never seen an artist's work quite like this. It's dreamy, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's absolutely captivating. I feel like this art style from Evleh would be absolutely perfectly suited to a kind of fantasy narrative, which this largely is. I really, really dig it. Also, I am a fan of Tom King's writing, and his lyrical prose style is absolutely on display here, especially in a lot of the kind of narrative, exposition-heavy portions of this book. It really is something to behold. Yes, I do have it in trade paperback, but I do understand they're making an oversized hardcover deluxe edition later this year. Cannot wait to hopefully check that out as budget allows. But for now, I have this dearly loved paperback edition, and this is a book, again, it's always on my mind. I'm always thinking about it. For a time, I felt like I showcased it in just about every list video, and commenters rightfully called me out on that. I've eased up on talking about it, but when I thought about this prompt, I thought, it's time. I need to bring this back. I need to talk about it more just because I think it's that good. I think there's still audience out there that hasn't read it yet, and I hope that they can pick it up after watching a video like this. Don't miss out on Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Next up, we have a Batman book that I always think about as well. We're going to be looking at Batman Venom by Denny O'Neil. This is a really haunting Batman story. It's one that I think a lot of longer-time Batman fans speak very highly of, but I think there's a lot of modern audiences that have perhaps never heard of this. I know that this has been out of print for quite some time. Hopefully we see it get a reprint sometime in the future. I'm sure there's a lot of collectors out there that want to pick up a copy. But essentially, this is before the time that Bane was one of his costume villains, but this is more or less the origin of the Venom substance, or at least a derivative of it that Bane eventually pumps through his veins. But this is the story where Batman basically gets addicted to a super steroid. But this is a really grounded, character-heavy book. Basically, we have Batman unable to save a young person from danger. This person loses their life, and it's essentially because Batman isn't physically strong enough. It's not that he's not smart enough. It's not that he's not there in time or has all the tools. It's that he is physically not as strong as he needs to be. He's not superpowered, and he can only be so strong. Well, he finds these pills, this substance Venom, and he basically gets addicted to it, and it makes him super strong, super muscular, but extra aggressive. It starts to warp his mind, and ultimately he has to break free of this substance, but it's a really intense book, and I think that it has some very serious stakes, and it's played very seriously. One of the reasons I like this book, one, it's just written incredibly well, the art throughout is quite gorgeous, but honestly, it takes one of my heroes and it stretches him to the brink. I see him in a way I haven't seen him before. before, first kind of falling to drugs, kind of basically telling himself it's okay, this is why I'm doing it, it'll help me save people, and then ultimately having to break away from this kind of cycle of addiction he's found himself in. It just really shows a new kind of resiliency and strength, but also a level of very like, wow, like Batman is vulnerable. He has some fragile aspects, and I just felt like he was stretched in a way I don't often see before or since. And this is just a really good book. I think about it a lot. I think, like I said, the art is really fun, the writing is really top notch, and it's just a Batman story unlike one I've read before. Like I said, really a good book. Definitely recommend Batman Venom. Of course, when I think of books that are always on my mind, I always go back to House of X, Powers of 10 by Jonathan Hickman. This is the book that just completely reset the status quo of X-Men this last time around, ushering us into that Dawn of X, Krakoa era, where the mutants have their own kind of nation-state island. They become a kind of superpower. They kind of unite all together as mutant kind. It's a really fun era. At least in my opinion, it really shook things up. It brought back some older characters, it made new teams, new ideas, new groupings, and honestly, this was one of my favorite ways to get onboarded into a new era of X-Men. I'm a huge X-Men fan, but I'm still playing catch-up because this is such a dense franchise that has so many spin-offs and eras and resets that it's really hard to sometimes know where to jump in. But for me, this is one of my favorite modern areas to start reading X-Men. It is a 12-ish issue maxi series. It's all collected here in this paperback. They also released an oversized hardcover edition. I'm sure we'll get more reprints in different forms in the future, but this is a really great book. This is a, for more or less standalone event. You don't really need to read a ton before this to enjoy it. It is pretty heavy, very cerebral. It is straight down the line Jonathan Hickman. He definitely plays to that and this kind of epic scoped storytelling, and I think this is really one of my favorites of his works. I think even if you don't want to get invested into this whole new era of X-Men that just recently ended, even if you just want a great standalone X-Men book, this might be it. This is a really fun one. I think the art throughout it is all fantastic. I do admit that it does jump around different timelines, different locations, so many different characters, but I think for the most part it reads pretty clearly. Like I said, I really dug this one. It's one I always think about, not only because it's a great book in and of itself, but because it really just established so much in the X-Men and Marvel universe, and I've enjoyed the ride over the recent years. And while I really like what Hickman did during his X-Men run proper and Inferno and different things like that, I do think that this is the high bar for me for Jonathan Hickman's tenure on X-Men. Don't miss out on House of X, Powers of 10. Next up, I have another Tom King book on the list. We're going to be looking at Batman Killing Time by, yes, Tom King, David Marquez, to name a few. This is a standard size hardcover, and for those wondering, this is a standalone kind of graphic novel collected edition they've made here. I think that they were released in single issues, but you could read this collected edition as one story. Now, Tom King did go on and actually write a Batman run proper on the title Batman, which I also really enjoyed. But one of the things I like about Killing Time is that it kind of exists in its own vacuum. Like, you don't need to read stuff around it. You can just enjoy it as a one-off story. And for my money, it really feels quite a bit different from his Batman run. And again, I liked that run just fine. I really enjoyed it. But this was something special. I like the singularity of effect here. Like I said, we don't need a ton else. The frame narrative of this book is really fascinating to me. I don't want to go into spoilers in this video, but it's really just sophisticated, interesting. There's a lot of great twists and turns with how this whole book is set up. I think the cast of characters we used, we have a couple on the front cover that you saw, and even as I'm flipping through, but like Batman, the Riddler, Catwoman, a bit of Killer Croc, and more. This was fun, and I think at a time when Catwoman has often been just a love interest, kind of safer character for Batman, it was fun having this more or less flashback story when Catwoman was still an active kind of villain against Batman. This is taking place earlier in his time as Batman, and that's also really fun as well because you feel like you're reading a bit of a Batman period piece. I just really liked how this was all constructed. I thought it was really well done. I loved the writing. I thought Tom King did a fantastic job. The characterizations of the different Batman supporting characters or villains, I think were all fleshed out and done well. I thought it was really well paced as well. And it's just a really good kind of just one and done Batman graphic novel. novel, and for whatever reason, I do go back to this. I don't know that I'm going to call it like a modern classic, but for some reason, this is just one of my favorites. I just think it's a really solid story, and I would love to hear of more people picking it up, especially if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. If you're a fan of Batman and you're just looking for a great story to read, and you've somehow missed Batman Killing Time, it is definitely one I recommend. In fact, flipping through, I might be ready for a reread. Next on my list, the first oversized hardcover, we have the Invincible Ultimate Collection, Volume 1 from Image Comics. This is an incredible series by Robert Kirkman. They released them across 12 of these Ultimate Collections, 3 big compendium editions, there's library editions, trade paperbacks, single issues, digital, of course. This book's been everywhere. It is probably the most successful indie superhero comic. I don't know, maybe this and like Spawn or Hellboy or something. I don't know the numbers, but these are some of the most famous indie superheroes. But for me, this is right down the line, one of the best superhero comics I've ever read. I really enjoy the fact that we have a really good beginning, middle, and end. It's not a series that has gone on in perpetuity like something like Batman, which of course I also love. No, this is really kind of, again, a set storyline that has an arc. I really like the cast of characters we have here. Invincible also really weaves in a lot of character drama and kind of slice of life, even within the kind of broader kind of superhero narrative we get. Essentially, his dad is a Superman-like character, and we have the title character, Invincible, Mark Grayson, develop similar superpowers. He can fly, he's super durable, he's super strong, and he wants to save the day as a costume crime fighter. Like I said, a pretty straightforward setup, but I think how Kirkman does the twists and turns is really what makes this series shine, along with, of course, just the character development. It really is about the characters here. I think Mark is infinitely likable. He feels like an everyman high schooler at the beginning of this book, and we get to really see him come into his own throughout the series. This Ultimate Collection, I think, includes the first maybe 13 issues of the run, 12, 13, but for me, by the end of this collection, I was absolutely hooked. The first issues maybe take a little bit to get going, but once we really kick it into gear, it is hard to go back. I had the privilege of finishing out this series last year, and it's one I will never forget, and it all began for me with a volume like this. Love this book, love this series. These editions in particular are quite fun. I love that oversized hardcover format, and it's nice to just have, a dozen issues or so. It makes it feel very readable, light, just super fun. I love this series, and I feel like I'm always thinking about it. Next on my list today, we're going to be looking at the Howard the Duck run by Chip Zdarsky and Joe Quinones over at Marvel Comics. Okay, for those that have watched this channel for a while, you might know I am a huge Marvel Comics fan. Yes, I love DC, yes, I love a lot of the indies, but I think I definitely lean a little bit Marvel just overall. And perhaps that's why I find myself loving this Howard the Duck run to the extent that I do. I think the Howard the Duck here really lampoons a lot of the Marvel Universe and some of its central characters or settings. I think it's done in a really tasteful and cheeky way. I think whether you're a super Marvel loyalist, as long as you can laugh at yourself a little bit, I think that there's so much in this run that is just genuinely amusing. I do feel like, though, if you're newer to comics, even if you don't understand a lot of these characters or this universe, you'll still find yourself enjoying this run and probably laughing at points. I think Chip Zdarsky, who has gone on to have a lot of celebration around his runs on things like Daredevil or even his early Batman stuff, I love to see his range here. Frankly, this was one of the first comedic titles I got from Zdarsky, and reading this next to maybe his Daredevil run, it's really fascinating just to see, again, the variety that this artist can really create and craft these words. I really admire what he can do. Another thing that makes this so great is just it's very heartfelt. These characters are very lovable. You find yourself just gripped and caring about where they're at, how they're doing, what motivates them, where they're going to end up. And I just think that that's really effectively done, especially in what is essentially a comedic series. I initially bought this book a year or two ago because, frankly, I got a great deal on it. It's a quicker run, it's a smaller omnibus, but I found myself absolutely floored by how great it was. I also felt like I heard no one talk about this run, so I was shocked when I found myself loving it to the degree I did. It's not hard to be a Zdarsky fan, but if I read a series like this, again, it just really makes me appreciate just how much this writer can do. Don't miss out on Howard the Duck by Chip Zdarsky and Joe Quinones. And hey, if you're watching this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos like this, comic book reviews, unboxings, shorts, things like that. Anyway, thank you for considering. Now on with the show. Okay, and now first up for omnibuses, we have the Fantastic Four Omnibus Volume 1 by Jonathan Hickman. Yes, Jonathan Hickman is back on the list today, folks, and today we're looking here at my favorite Hickman run I've had the pleasure of reading thus far. Yes, for me, Fantastic Four is the high watermark for Hickman. I absolutely adore it. This absolutely kickstarted my love for the Fantastic Four. I already kind of like them, reading some of the Jack Kirby, Stan Lee stuff, really enjoyed that Silver Age stuff, and I've dabbled with Fantastic Four over the years, but when I read the Hickman run, something in me just came alive. Its blend of science fiction, fantasy, and just deep character drama, it just all worked for me. It hit on all cylinders. I think that this is really what exposed me to Jonathan Hickman in the first place, and to see, again, that kind of cerebral, epic scale storytelling play across just these dozens and dozens of issues, it's just really a masterclass on mainstream comic book storytelling, at least in my mind. The entire run from Jonathan Hickman is collected across 2 omnibus volumes. Like I said, this is the volume 1, which I am showcasing for the purposes of this video. But yeah, this was just a fantastic run, and this is one I just always think about as just, again, one of my favorite superhero comic runs of all time. This was, I think, voted my favorite comic book of 2022 that I had the opportunity to read, so suffice it to say, I care about it quite a bit. I feel like this is another book I showcase on the channel often because I think it's great for genre fans, superhero fans, or those that maybe want to check out the works of Jonathan Hickman. Across this run as well, we have just fantastic art, as you can see here. I think that a lot of the artists on this Fantastic Four run tend to go more realistic, which I appreciate, but overall, this was just a stunning run that, again, I just can't shake. I feel like I think about it a lot. This really had ramifications on the Marvel Universe in many ways. It set up things that he would go on to touch on in his Avengers run, and especially Secret Wars, and again, it's just a really good cornerstone within the Marvel Universe. I think if you're looking for a great modern Marvel Comics run, you could do so much worse than Fantastic Four by Jonathan Hickman, which is, again, one of my favorite runs of all time. Okay, next on this list, Batman by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, Omnibus Volume 1. This is also a Volume 1 of a 2-volume set that collects the entirety of these creators' run here on the Batman title. This is the Batman that kicked off the New 52 era for Batman after the events of Flashpoint, and this was really my onboarding into a proper Batman run after I began collecting comics on my own. I had read Batman before this, I had read some Batman comics, of course, but this was one of the ongoing titles when I really got serious about comic books. And for me, that really holds the key as to one of the reasons why I love this run so much. I think another one is just the approach that Snyder and Capullo had. It was just a bit moodier, it was a bit kind of grittier and darker in some ways. I just think that there was a horrific element to their run, but it's also just really fantastic. I think Snyder's writing is really sharp here and beautiful in its way. Capullo's art is something I had never been introduced to really before reading this Batman run, and it's just pretty haunting. I think that it's in some ways grotesque, in some ways absolutely beautiful, and it just really works for me. And I think that the melding of those two creators, you just have a really powerful product here, and I think I could see that on just about every page of this omnibus. This run is also really great. Being part of the New 52 there, you don't really need to read anything before this to enjoy. It's meant to relaunch with that new number 1 and to be really accessible to new readers. This run in the very beginning also introduces us to a new set of villains in the Court of Owls, which is honestly one of my favorite modern Batman villains. A fantastic series here. I absolutely love it. This is one that's always on my mind, close to my heart. I used to have these standard size hardcovers that collected the whole run, and I recently, maybe a year or two ago, upgraded to these omnibus editions, and I haven't looked back since. They're gorgeous, love that oversized hardcover format, and to me it's a great way to collect this just unforgettable ride. Love, love, love Batman by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I mean, just look at it. It's gorgeous. It's so hard to look away. For me, this is easily part of that greatest hits list, and absolutely, again, just something that's constantly on my mind. Next up is another Marvel Omnibus. We're going to be looking at The Amazing Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane Omnibus. For me, this is one that's always on my mind, particularly for the birth of Venom, one of Spider-Man's arch enemies who becomes kind of an unlikely anti-hero ally in different portions of its history, but it all began right here. I know for me, being a kid of the 90s, Venom was definitely a popular figure in the kind of Spider-Man pop culture, and I would love seeing his incarnations in the animated series or video games, eventually movies, although maybe I didn't like his incarnation in the movie initially. But anyway, this is really a run that I think about quite often. This is also the first time I really saw the pencil work of Todd McFarlane. Yes, he did go on to have his own Spider-Man run in the adjectiveless Spider-Man series, which is also pretty fun. He both illustrated, wrote, and inked that series, and you can really see him just come into his own when he's inking as well. But that art here, even in this book here with David Michelinie, I think the writing is really strong, and that art really pops. We see throughout this run so much experimentation in panel layout, how the web lines are kind of drawn and how the sense of movement is conveyed. I think that this is one of the most visually stimulating runs in Spider-Man's history. I think it was just absolutely revolutionary in depicting everyone's favorite wall crawler. Like I said, we also again have the birth of the Venom character, which I also think is just such a mainstay in the Marvel universe and pop culture now in general. And I think because of all these reasons, I really think about this run often. I couldn't even say that this is my favorite Spider-Man run, and yet this is one I return back to again and again in my mind. Reading key issues or flipping through those amazing pencil works by Todd McFarlane, again, it's just one I think about often. I'm so happy Marvel has released this in the past. They reprinted it a couple years ago now. A really, really fun volume and a great way to read this incredible run. Looking through it again, it's just easy to get nostalgic when I see these images. Like I said, it's a really important time in the history of this character, and even just seeing Todd McFarlane just unleash his powers on a mainstream book. Very, very fun stuff. And last but certainly not least on this list today, the best there is at what he does, we're looking at the Wolverine Omnibus Volume 1 from Marvel Comics. This was one that was really on my wish list for quite some time. When it was in reprint the other year, I had to snatch it up. This collects all the earliest appearances, solo appearances for Wolverine. We have his origin issues in the Incredible Hulk. We have the Weapon X kind of mini-series. We have those early kind of Chris Claremont, Frank Miller issues. We have the Wolverine and Kitty Pryde miniseries, his appearance in, is it Marvel Presents? Anyway, really, really fantastic stuff here. I love all of these early Wolverine stories. I think even just his early exploits in Madripoor are just some of the most iconic Wolverine stories for me that I've had the pleasure of reading. I loved him in the pages of the Uncanny X-Men from, of course, Chris Claremont. But reading his solo stuff, it's just a whole nother level. It's grittier, it's a little bit darker. He's a little more surly just than he is maybe in the general team book. But it really makes him just such a standout character. For me, he's easily one of my favorite kind of Marvel anti-heroes, more intense heroes. And this is just a run I think about, like I said, a lot. This book specifically, I just keep going back to. I've read some of these stories a few times easily. I feel like Weapon X, which I mentioned earlier, Barry Windsor Smith art, absolutely stunning. I feel like I return to that story, and every time I do, I enjoy it a little bit more. Again, that Frank Miller, Chris Claremont collaboration is also just an iconic little miniseries in my mind. This omnibus was the first time I was actually able to read that Wolverine and Kitty Pryde miniseries, which actually I thought was pretty affecting as well. There's just so much packed into this omnibus, and this is, again, a comic book collection I think about so often. Wolverine is easily one of my favorite, probably top 3 Marvel characters, for sure top 5. And this omnibus, like I said, I just think about this run all the time. I love the art we get throughout it here, but really just getting more just drilled into the foundations of what makes Logan, what makes Wolverine tick in this collection. Overall, just incredibly standout. Really, really good stuff here. Love this book. Love this collection. Okay, and that's already going to wrap us up for 10 comic books that are always on my mind. I know that this is a list that you've probably seen a lot of these books again and again, especially if you're a fan of this channel, or if you have been for a while, rather. But every so often, I like to showcase some of my favorites. Consider this the Comic Book Report's greatest hits. These are just some of my favorite books. There's so many more I could have thrown on this list, like Ultimate Spider-Man, or Captain America by Ed Brubaker, or, gosh, I don't even know, maybe the Death of Superman era. These are so many I could have thrown on this list, but these 10 really kind of floated to the surface in many ways for one reason or the other, and honestly, it was really fun just scrolling through memory lane throughout this video. Thank you for indulging me. In the comments, I would love to hear, what are some books that are always on your mind? What are some comic books you feel like you think about often, return back to, maybe recommend very often? Anyway, would love to hear all that. Would love to get some great comic book recommendations going in the comments for myself and those others watching and reading. Just would love to, again, maybe read something I hadn't heard of before, maybe one of your favorites. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thanks again, guys. Please don't forget to give this video a like, that comment, and check out another on your way out. Thanks. Have a good one.